Assalamu alaikum students, welcome back to class, and you know that this is the class for ENG503, that is your prose 2, and in this module, in this subject, we are going to cover not only the travelogue that we are currently studying, but also short stories. And I need to remind you here that we are going to go faster now, because I told you in my last lecture that there's a lot of description that Jonathan Swift has given in this travelogue, and we will be skipping over that description so that we can cover the text faster. That is not to say that this description is not important. It is, it definitely is. But because of the bulk of work that we have included in your module, we will need to skip over some of the slides. I'll still show you the slides, but as far as explanation is concerned, you might find 4 or 5 slides explained in one go. So you will have to pick up a little speed. You are also now in the 3rd semester, and I know that you can read faster and you can take in a lot more of the material than you could in the last semester. So this is your lecture 4 for ENG503, and in this lecture we are going to continue discussing Jonathan Swift's travelogue, Gulliver's Travels. Just to recap a little of what we did yesterday, or should I say in the last lecture, we were discussing the fact that Lemuel Gulliver's ship is wrecked on a rock, and after he and his crew members are let down into the boat turns over because the storm is continuing and there's a very strong wind, and after the boat is upset, Gulliver does not know what happens to his fellow crew members. He assumes that they drowned. As far as Gulliver himself is concerned, he swims and he swims and he swims, and just when he thinks that he can swim no more, he reaches land. And he's so tired by all the events that have taken place since the storm overtook the ship, that he just lies down on the grass and goes to sleep. Now it is evening time when he gets there, and it is daytime when he wakes up. Gulliver himself estimates that he slept for about 8 hours. And when he wakes up, he finds out that he's tied on all sides. His arms and legs are tied, and his hair is tied down. There are also what he calls ligatures that go across his body, and he finds that he cannot move. With a lot of strength, he attempts to free his left hand, but when he has freed his left hand, he finds out that it hurts a lot. That is because his hand had been tied down, and when he pulled up his hand, it took a lot of strength, and because they had nailed his hand down, therefore his hand hurts when he picks it up. Okay, so we will take up from where we left off in the last lecture, and today we will discuss what happens to Gulliver after he wakes up. Now he's already told you in the previous lecture that he has these small men who come up on his body and who exclaim, they are surprised to see this giant here. And so they exclaim and they use a language that Gulliver is not familiar with, but which he learns in time. We will discuss that in the succeeding lectures. For now, let us see what happens to Gulliver. I thought it the most prudent method to lie still, and my design was to continue so till night, when my left hand being already loose, I could easily free myself. And as for the inhabitants, I had reason to believe I might be a match for the greatest army. So while he is lying down and while these people are traveling over him and trying to talk with him, trying to communicate with him, Gulliver decides that he is just going to lie still, because when he starts to move, these people start firing arrows at him. Now he doesn't want that. It's not that these arrows cause a lot of harm to him, because you have to remember that these men are less than 6 inches tall. So they're very small, about this size. So men this size, when they fire arrows, they are not going to harm Gulliver. And yet he finds out that some of these arrows have poisoned tips. And particularly when these arrows strike his face, he finds that blisters are forming on his face and on his hands, because these are the only unprotected parts of the body. The rest of his body is covered, and so when they sort of try to prod his body with spears, it doesn't hurt him, it doesn't harm him, because he's wearing that leather waistcoat. But when they strike his face and his hands, because the arrow tips are poisoned, they hurt. So Gulliver decides that he's just going to lie still until nightfall. And now this is what is going on in his mind. He thinks that if he lies still, they will not harm him, they will not fire arrows at him. So he wants to wait until it is night, until it is dark, and then he says, because my left hand is already free, I can use that to free the rest of my body. And then he says, once I get up, I can be a match with the greatest army that the Lilliputians can produce. So he is not afraid of them. What he is afraid of is the poisoned arrow tips. So this is what is going on in his mind. But fortune disposed otherwise of me. Okay, so when the people observed I was quiet, they discharged no more arrows, but by the noise I knew their numbers increased. So he lies quiet, they don't fire any more arrows at him, but he does realize that the sound increases, and when the noise increases, it gives him the idea that more and more people were coming to see him. And about 4 yards from me, over against my right ear, I heard a knocking for above an hour. So what they are doing now is they put up a kind of stage. This knocking sound that he hears is a stage being erected close to his face. He says that the distance is about 4 yards from me. So the distance is such that whoever is going to stand on the stage will be safe from Gulliver. Gulliver cannot hit out at that person, because 4 yards is a long distance. But he does hear the sound of this stage being erected, and when he tries to move his head a little, he sees what these people are doing. Now, when they erect this sort of stage, he sees that there are ladders against the sides. Remember, these are men who are less than 6 inches tall. So for them to reach Gulliver, for them to be able to communicate with Gulliver, they have to be at the same level. And that is why they are erecting this stage. So he says that once they had erected that stage, a person of quality climbed up the ladders, came up to the stage, and made me a long speech, whereof I understood not one syllable. Obviously, because he's talking in a language that is unfamiliar for Gulliver, he makes a very long speech, but Gulliver doesn't understand a single word of it. It's the same as if I were to start speaking in a language that you don't understand, and if I deliver this long lecture, you're not going to understand anything. But because you have read and you have heard and studied English for many years before you start your MA English program, therefore whatever I am saying to you is understandable. So this person of quality comes up and he makes a long speech, but Gulliver doesn't understand a word. So this communication does not take place. It's just a speech that he makes. And he says that before he starts this speech, he cried out 3 times, "Langro dehul san," and these are words from their language and words that Gulliver doesn't understand. But later on, when he starts learning their language, he understands what they were saying then. So in retrospect, when he looks back, he can understand what is being said to him. But at that moment, when the words are being uttered, Gulliver does not understand anything at all. But what he does know is that as soon as these words Langro dehul san are uttered, what happens is 50 of these men come and they cut off the strings that fasten the left side of his head. Remember, Gulliver has very long hair, so what they do is they tie his hair down and he cannot move. So when this exclamation is made and when this person of quality calls out Langro dehul san, 50 men come and they cut off the ropes that bind Gulliver's left side so that he can turn his face and he can talk to the person standing on the stage. He appeared to be of a middle age. Now Gulliver is describing this man. And remember, these detailed descriptions are given because Jonathan Swift wants us to believe that these things actually happened and that they're not just a kind of fairy story. So he describes this person of quality, this man of importance who comes up on the stage, and he says that I know that he was a very important man because one of the men who climbed up onto that stage were holding the train, and if a person has a man holding his dress, then that person is obviously a person of importance, a rich man. It's only the rich men who could afford to wear dresses that reached the floor. And you know, a train is that piece of long cloth that is adjoined to your dress so that it trails behind you. It's something that sort of sweeps the floor. So this page is not the page that you have in your notebook. If you look this word up in a dictionary, it will be a servant who is who's generally a young boy, and he's a personal servant to a man. So these rich men had these dresses which sort of would sweep the floor, and that's what he sees here happening. So this man has servants with him. He's a person of quality. He's a man of importance. He acted every part of an orator, of a speaker, one who could speak very well, and on the basis of his communication, he is given a certain rank. And he says, I could observe many periods of threatenings and others of promises, pity and kindness. Remember, Gulliver cannot understand what this man is saying. It's only through his manner, through the rise and fall of his speech, that Gulliver understands that this man is warning Gulliver, and yet he appears to be a kind person. He says, we are going to be good to you. All this Gulliver understands from the manner in which the man speaks. And Gulliver answers him in a few words, but in the most submissive manner. Remember, Gulliver doesn't want any arrows fired at him. So he's very humble, very polite. He answers this important man, but neither can understand the other's language. And Gulliver goes on to say that being almost famished with hunger, I now made actions or tried to convey to them that I was hungry. Now, how would he do that? Obviously, by pointing to his mouth and making that gesture for food. So now this is a universal gesture for food. No matter what language you are in, no matter what age you are, when somebody makes this gesture, you know that he or she wants food. So this is what Gulliver does. And although he says it's not polite when somebody is delivering a speech to keep on interrupting him by pointing to your mouth, he says, I did that because I was very, very hungry. Remember, Gulliver had been through a storm. He had eaten no food then. He had been rowing and he had been swimming for hours before he comes to Lilliput. And when he comes to Lilliput, he goes to sleep for 8 hours. So it's more than 24 hours since he has had anything to eat or drink. So when he makes these gestures, this important person who is called Hergo descends from the stage and gives orders that food and drink are to be provided for Gulliver. And you see the amount of food that they bring in. They had baskets full of meat. And then, and in this meat, he says, I could see the flesh of different animals. But the thing was that they were very small in size, and that's something that you have to keep in mind. Gulliver was a tall man. So if you take, let's say, somebody who is 6 feet, how many of you are 6 feet? Now you think of yourself and you think of men who are 4 or 5 inches high, just about this size. Obviously, the food that they are going to bring in will be of the same size. Some of them are small in stature. Like this page that he's talking about, he says, was no bigger than my middle finger. So this is about 3 inches. So this page, because he's a small boy, is only 3 inches high. So if you have men who are 3 inches or even 6 inches tall, how big would be a basket that they would carry? Tiny ones, maybe this size. So if you give Gulliver food in this size baskets, it's going to be one mouthful, one bite. Have you eaten those one bite samosas? Or these one bite patties? They're about this size, and you just put them into your mouth and that's it, finished. So that is what happens to Gulliver. They bring in meat, and it's different parts of the animals' bodies, but he just takes all of it in, because for him it is just one bite. And then he says that then I pointed and I said, I'm thirsty also. So then what they did was that they brought in these barrels full of wine. And this huge barrel that they brought in was, how big could it be? Not bigger than the men themselves. So if it is huge for them, it would be what? 5 inches? 5 inches in size. Your teacup is about 3.5 to 4 inches high. This high. So a coffee mug would be higher, 5 inches. Now 5 inches, because he was very hungry and this was wine, it was not a hot drink, he just drank it in one gulp. And then he had another gulp and he was satisfied. So for him, he says the size was that of a half pint. And the taste, he says, was delicious. So he likes the wine, he likes the food. The only thing is that his size demands a lot of food and a lot of drink. But the Lilliputians cannot really provide so much food and drink. So once he has finished eating and drinking, he says that those people, they shouted for joy and they danced, and what they said was, Hekina de Gul, Hekina de Gul. Look at how much he's eating, look at the giant. So you don't know what these words mean until Gulliver actually starts learning the language. So once he has drunk that wine, they make a sign that he should throw down these containers or these barrels. And before he does that, they warn people to move away, because when he's going to throw down that barrel, it's obviously going to hit someone. So the people move away, they make room for him, and then he throws that down. And when they want people to get out of the way, they have another command, and that is Borash Melvola, Borash Melvola. They say that, and the people move aside. And once he sort of throws those barrels of wine back, there is another shout of Hekina de Gul. It's like, God be praised, Alhamdulillah, or Subhanallah, something like that they are saying. So Gulliver says that all the time his mind is working, and he thinks, especially when these men are passing across his body, you know, they are walking all over his body. Now that's a very strange sensation. And Gulliver says that it came to my mind that if I were to grab a few of them, I could throw them down, I could kill them very easily. They're very small. And yet, he says, I remembered the arrows fired at me. And so I let them do what they wanted to, and I did not pick up any of the men and throw them down on the ground. I did not kill anyone. I did not hurt anyone. And one more reason why he doesn't hurt them is because now that they have provided him with food and drink, Gulliver is morally bound to be submissive. You know, they have been very hospitable. He has eaten so much food. It was food that was enough for 1,000 people, and they have given it to him. And if they have given it to him once, they will have to do it again and again. They will have to do it as long as Gulliver is there in their land. So he says, the laws of hospitality did not allow me to grab hold of these men and to throw them down on the ground. And besides, Gulliver says, I was surprised how brave these people were. You know, you have this giant of a man and they are walking all over him. They are traveling across his body. And that's a very brave thing to do. So he says that when I did not make any more movement to free myself, these people, they brought in a person of a higher rank, somebody who was coming direct from the king's court. And this person, he mounted or climbed on my right leg and came close to my face with a dozen men. And he made a speech. He showed me his credentials, what he calls his signet royal. That is the sign that the king has given him and that he can produce to show that he is a representative of the king. He's not just an ordinary man. So this person comes and he makes a long speech and he keeps pointing in a certain direction. He keeps on saying, there, there. And in time, Gulliver understands that the king wants to see Gulliver. Now, I told you in the very beginning that Swift is using this travelogue to comment on the rulers of the day, to pass judgment on how England was being ruled. And when he talks about the emperor and the emperor's court, he's also giving reference to the conditions of his time. So when this important person comes from the court, he explains to Gulliver that His Majesty wants to see Gulliver. Now, Gulliver realizes that as soon as he was sort of perceived, as soon as people saw him in Lilliput, they at once went and told the emperor that there is a giant who is lying on the shore. And so the king said, okay, bring me the giant. Now, it would have been very easy for the king to have come to Gulliver where Gulliver is lying. But things are not that easy for kings. Now, this king of the Lilliputians may be a very small man, maybe about 6 inches tall, but his ego is huge. He will not go to Gulliver. Gulliver must be brought to him. And you see how difficult it is to carry him once they make up their mind that he is to be carried to the emperor. They make a special sort of bed for him. And Gulliver, and therefore Jonathan Swift, calls this bed an engine because it has wheels, it can be transported, it can be moved. And that is how the emperor wants to see Gulliver. Now there are a few points here that you need to think about. One, I have already told you that he wants to meet Gulliver, but he wants to see Gulliver when Gulliver is brought to him, that is the emperor. He doesn't want to go and see Gulliver with Gulliver lying there. So what he does do is he sends a command, he sends instructions that a bed is to be prepared, and this giant, who is later on called Man Mountain, this Man Mountain is to be transported, is to be taken to the king. So when the Hergo and his people realize that Gulliver is not going to harm them, they leave him, and soon after that he hears a shout going up, "Peplum Selan," and he realizes that this bed on wheels has been prepared and it has come for Gulliver. So he says, "I felt great numbers of people on my left side relaxing the cords to such a degree that I was able to turn upon my right, yak, and to ease myself with making water." So Gulliver, you know, sometimes he becomes very crude and he gives references to things that you would not ordinarily find in literature. So he says that because I had eaten and because I had drunk so much wine, so this person of importance, he gave instructions to the men to relax the cords and the ropes that bind Gulliver on one side so that he can urinate and thus relieve himself. As I said, Swift makes these yucky references sometimes. He uses language which you don't really want used in class. So he says that let's skip this. He says that when I was given freedom, I urinated, and that was very relaxing for me. And then they made preparations to carry him to the emperor. Before they sort of made an attempt to lift him onto this huge bed on wheels, they used some medicine to daub his face and hands. Remember, those are the two exposed portions, and the arrows that were fired, they were stinging, and they had raised blisters, boils on his body, on the exposed portions of his body. But when they put that ointment onto his face and his hands, that swelling, it went away, and he was okay. So he says that after I had eaten and drunk, I somehow felt very sleepy. I don't know why I felt sleepy, but I just went off to sleep. And later Gulliver realizes that when he was drinking that wine, remember, the doctors had put sedatives, tranquilizers, in that wine. So once he has eaten and drunk, Gulliver goes back to sleep again. And it's while he's sleeping that he is dragged on to this engine, as Gulliver calls it, and a bed on wheels that you and I would call it. What's another name for it? Yes, a gurney. A gurney is the kind of stretcher that is used in hospitals. So what is made here for Gulliver is a kind of stretcher. The only thing is it is huge. It is huge. So to go back to what Swift was saying, he says that when I went off to sleep, these people tied me up in such a way that I would be able to eat and drink. They weren't going to starve him. I would be able to eat and drink, but I would not be able to move. So if we skip the next couple of slides, it will not matter much, but I do want you to have the text. So he says that he was put onto this engine, as he calls it, and he also explains to you how that is done. He says these people are most excellent mathematicians and arrived to a great perfection in mechanics by the countenance and encouragement of the emperor. So he gives the emperor credit, and he says these people are very educated, they are very intelligent, and therefore they can make things that other people would find it very hard to do that. Now he is being very sarcastic here because the emperor has nothing to do with their intelligence. If a people are intelligent, they are intelligent because their minds work. But in giving credit to the emperor, he is making his position clear. Remember, Gulliver wants to be friends with the emperor. He doesn't want the emperor going against him, because that would mean that the emperor would maybe send out parties with bows and arrows. Maybe he would use other means to, if not to kill Gulliver, but to hurt him, to cause him pain. So he says that the emperor is a renowned patron of learning, and this is again a reference to the monarchs in England being renowned for their patronage of knowledge and learning. And if you go back to let's say your 15th, 16th and even 17th century, there were court poets, people who were writing poetry in praise of the king or the queen, people who were writing in praise of the aristocrats, and they were given money, they were given land, they were given beautiful dresses. All this was done to encourage the spread of education and learning. So he says it is because of this emperor that they made this this wheeled bed in which they were going to carry me, and this is the same that they use to carry trees and other great weights. He often builds his largest men of war, whereof some are 9 feet long, in the woods where the timber grows. So he says, you know, so intelligent is this emperor and his people that their greatest ships are made in these forests of timber. And 500 carpenters and engineers were immediately set at work to prepare the greatest engine they had. So this huge bed that they bring in is a result of 500 men working at the same time, working day in and day out, no holidays, and then they finally prepared this sort of stretcher or this gurney on which Gulliver is to be transported to the metropolis. "900 of the strongest men were employed to draw up these cords." So it wasn't an easy job. It wasn't something that they could do very easily. It took a lot of effort, it took a lot of time, And of course, it took a lot of energy on the part of these men to transport Gulliver. So whatever happens during this time, the method that they used to transport him and put him onto this stretcher, all this he is explained later, because all the action takes place when Gulliver is sleeping. And it's later, much later, that he's told that 900 of the men were employed to pull these cords that they tie, and 1,500 of the emperor's largest horses, each about 4.5 inches high. Can you see horses this big? They had to pull. So obviously they needed 1,500. 500 and the horses would have collapsed. They would have died. So so they start on this journey to the metropolis, and Gulliver says it took them 4 hours, and they were still on the road. Remember, these are horses that are tiny. So 1,500 of these 4.5 inches high horses were used to pull this stretcher. And even then, it took us a long time. So he says, after 4 hours, I felt a sort of tickling sensation in my nose, and I saw that one of the men one of the passers-by, he just climbed up. He was curious to see what the giant was like. And what he did was that not only did they climb up, but one of them took his pike, which is a weapon, and he stuffed it up Gulliver's nostril. And it was for the soldier, it was a dangerous weapon. For Gulliver, it was like a straw. So when he sort of stuffed it up his nostril to see if Gulliver was breathing, if Gulliver would react, Gulliver's body reacted by sneezing. It's like if you put a blade of grass in your nostril, you're going to sneeze because it is a foreign substance. It's not hair. So he wakes up and he finds out that they are still on the road, and they finally decided that they would not complete the journey then because night was falling, and so they decided to keep this journey for the next day. And at night, 500 guards were placed on either side of Gulliver so that he would not run away. And you know, and I know that if he had wanted to run away, he could have done it very easily. So the next morning they continue their march, and the emperor comes out to meet him. But his great officers would by no means suffer his majesty to endanger his person by mounting on my body. So they reach the emperor's place. The emperor comes out, but the emperor's courtiers will not allow him to climb up onto Gulliver's body. Again, this is one place where Jonathan Swift is being very sarcastic in the sense that people, noblemen especially, who surround the king are his advisors. They are advisors who are supposed to give good, solid advice, but they don't always do that. And that is what he's referring to here when he says that the emperor came to meet me, but his advisors would not allow him to climb up onto my leg and to come and talk to me face to face. At the place where the carriage stopped, there stood an ancient temple, esteemed to be the largest in the whole kingdom. But because of something that had happened in the past, nobody was using that temple as a place of worship, and this temple is therefore made into a house for Gulliver. And everything had been taken away from the temple. You know, in a place of worship you have statues and you have beautiful ornaments that they had put in. All of those things, all the furniture was taken away, and Gulliver was told, this is your house, this is where you are going to stay from now on. So he was conveyed this decision through signs that this is your house and this is where you will stay. He says the great gate fronting to the north was about 4 feet high. Now 4 feet is very high for the Lilliputians, the tallest of whom are 6 inches. So 6 inches and 4 feet is 8 times the size of the size of the Lilliputians, and that's a very high gate. But it's still not high enough for Gulliver, because Gulliver is about 6 feet tall. So if it is a gate that is 4 feet high, Gulliver cannot walk into that gate. What he can do is he can bend down and then enter. So once he enters, chains are brought out, and the number he gives you as 411. 411, so about 91 chains were brought out, and Gulliver was tied in different places. And the funny thing is, Gulliver says that these were chains that were not stronger than a lady's watch chain. But the Lilliputians prided themselves on what a wonderful work they had done. So he further describes this temple, and he goes on to say that the courtiers of the emperor were not allowed to see Gulliver. At a rough estimate, Gulliver says above 100,000 people came from the town. Probably the entire population of the town turned out to see this giant, or as the Lilliputians referred to him, this man mountain. For them it was like a mountain moving. And of course all of them had to use ladders in order to climb up to Gulliver's body. But this was forbidden on pain of death. When the workmen found out that I could not break loose, they cut all the strings that bound me. Now, this is a very strange situation. When he tries to free himself, they want to tie him down. When he says he will not move, then the workers trust him, and then they cut loose all his bonds. And when they do that, Gulliver can finally rise up, although he feels very sad. Swift says, with as melancholy a disposition. So I got up with a very sad expression on my face. And the people were amazed. They were absolutely amazed. The chains, he says, that held my left leg were about 2 yards long. Again, very long for the 6-inch high Lilliputians, but not long enough as far as Gulliver is concerned, and therefore he is given this this temple to make his house and to rest there whenever whenever he wants to. With this adventure coming to an end, I came back out of my house having occasion for fresh air. The emperor was already descended from the tower and advancing on horseback toward me, which had like to have caused him dear, for the beast, though very well trained, yet wholly unused to such a sight, which appeared as if a mountain moved before him, reared up on its hinder feet. So the horse that is carrying the emperor, when he gets close to Gulliver or the man mountain, he just rears up on his hind feet and he refuses to go further. But because the emperor is a very good he's a very good horseman, so he doesn't fall down, he's not scared, and he's able to control his horse. So much for the first chapter. We're going to go even faster now. Chapter 2 gives you the description of the emperor of Lilliput, attended by several of the nobility, and of course this is going to be very, very sarcastic. The emperor's person and habit described, learned men appointed to teach the author about their language. He gains favor by his mild disposition. His pockets are searched and his sword and pistols taken from him. Now, when he starts the second chapter, Swift in this chapter tries to describe the emperor, tries to describe his courtiers, and the fact that the emperor gave one command, and that was that although his pockets could be searched, whatever was found in his pockets would be handed over to him, probably when he was leaving. So this is the instruction that the emperor gives out, and when Gulliver shows no objection to it, it makes a very positive impression on the emperor. When I found myself on my feet, I looked about me and must confess I never beheld a more entertaining prospect. The country around appeared like a continued garden, and the enclosed fields, which were generally 40 feet square, resembled so many beds of flowers. So for the Lilliputians, everything is huge. For Gulliver, not so. Again, you have to remember that Jonathan Swift is using satire to reform society. And here he pays particular attention to the fact that people think that they are wonderful, whereas actually they are not. Jonathan Swift, it has been said, does not spare anyone. He's very bitter, he's very sarcastic, he appears to be almost cruel in his remarks. But you need to remember that these men who were not even 6 inches high, they thought so much of themselves, they considered themselves of such importance that it is very difficult for Gulliver to adjust to them. And the reason I say it is difficult is because Gulliver is so huge And these men are so small. If he wants to, he can just finish off the entire nation. But that's not what he wants. He gives a little description of the palace, of the surrounding woods, and the countryside, and the fact that Gulliver can see everything if he just stands up. You know, if he stands up, I can see everything lying on the floor. But everything on the floor cannot see me because I am so big in comparison with whatever there is on the ground. And you also have to remember that all the time Gulliver is tied with chains. And if he is tied with chains, he obviously cannot escape. So he says that from this time forward, I had to make compromises. Now, I told you that there are things that Jonathan Swift talks about that I'm going to skip over. One of these is that if there's any mention of urinating, or if there's any mention of Gulliver doing his toilet, I'm going to skip over that. The first reference that he gives is something that sort of it's not very pleasant to go over it, but he gives a lot of details, so I'm just going to skip over them, and you can read them when you have the text. So he says, when this adventure was at an end, when he had done his toilet, he came back out of the house because he wanted fresh air. The emperor was already descended from the tower and advancing on horseback towards me. He made a speech. Now, when he is coming towards Gulliver, the horse, who is not trained to see something as huge as Gulliver, it sort of rears back. It rears up on its hind feet, and it could just have thrown the emperor down, but the emperor, because he's a very accomplished horseback rider, he holds on fast to the horse. And then those who were attending him, they just sort of ran in and held on to the reins of the horse. So when the emperor comes close to him, Gulliver says that the horse, it sort of rears back on its hind feet, and if the emperor had not shown presence of mind, he could just have been thrown off the horse. But the emperor, because he's a very good rider, he manages to control his horse, and meanwhile his courtiers and his attendants, they run in and they help the emperor to dismount or to get off the horse, so that he can come and talk with Gulliver. Now we're going to end this lecture here, but before we do that, let me quickly recap what we have done today. We started with the chapter that gives you a description of Gulliver lying on the ground, and I told you that Gulliver decided to not move until night had fallen, and then, because one of his hands is already free, then he would use that hand to remove all those nails and all those ropes that were binding him, and then he would escape. This is what he thinks about when he is lying on the ground and these people start firing arrows at him, because these arrows are poisonous and they raise blisters on his hands as well as on his face. So he decides that he will not move, and once he has decided that, he just keeps quiet. And when he keeps quiet, he realizes that very close to where he's lying, at a distance of 4 yards, they are building a stage, a wooden stage. And once they have done that, you see one of the courtiers of the emperor come up, and he stands on that stage and he talks with Gulliver. Now Gulliver knows that this is a person of importance because of the way he's dressed, because of the fact that he has servants with him, and so this man, he starts to talk and he makes a long speech. And what Gulliver notices in this speech is that the man threatens, the man promises, he shows kindness. All this he shows in the manner in which he's speaking. And although Gulliver cannot understand his speech, remember he's talking in a language that that is a foreign language for Gulliver. Gulliver does not understand the words, but he does understand the gesture, he understands the tone of voice. And once that speech has been delivered, Gulliver shows that he is hungry. He makes gestures, he makes signs, and it's very quickly that the people respond, and they bring him food and drink, and they are very cooperative in that. And it's later that Gulliver realizes that as soon as the king found out that he had descended on the shores of Lilliput, the king had given orders for food and drink to be brought to him. Now the food that is brought to him is brought in baskets, and Gulliver, he sort of finishes it like that. It's so quickly that he eats, because these baskets, for Gulliver, they are very small. For the Lilliputians, they're very big, and you have entire animals who are sort of placed in these baskets for Gulliver's consumption. But Gulliver finishes them off like this, and then he drinks his wine, the wine that is rolled up to him. And once he has done that, he feels morally bound not to protest, not to make any movement which would go against him. So once he has been fed, he realizes that a man of great importance has come to see him, and once this person comes up to him, he makes gestures and he delivers a speech that gives Gulliver the idea that he is to be taken to the emperor, and the emperor wants him to be brought in lying down, so that not only is Gulliver tied, but Gulliver is lying down. And the reason I told you is because, for one, the emperor wants to make a positive impression on his people, the Lilliputians, by showing how strong the Lilliputians are, that they have captured this huge giant and now they're bringing him for display. That is one idea. The other is that because the emperor is short in height compared to Gulliver, he does not want Gulliver to sort of look down on him. He wants Gulliver and himself to be on the same level. He does not want Gulliver looking down on him. So the emperor is very smart, he's very intelligent, and Gulliver pays tribute to him by saying that, you know, this engine that they make, or this stretcher or gurney that they make, is very well designed, and the plan is very well executed, so that when Gulliver goes off to sleep, he is pulled and pushed by hundreds of men and hundreds of horses, and when he wakes up, he is already on his way to the emperor in the capital city. And once he gets there, he is shown a temple that is old and that is not used anymore, and he's told that this will be his house. Now the main gate of the temple is just 4 feet high, which is not enough for Gulliver, but it is more than enough for the Lilliputians. So Gulliver sort of crawls in, he bends over and he enters the house, and then he's tied with chains. And a lot of chains are tied to his ankle so that he will not run away. Now it's not very difficult for Gulliver to break these chains, but it is very important for the emperor to let the Lilliputians know that Gulliver is in their power, that he cannot escape. So it's a direct hit at the monarchy, in the sense that all the time there are attempts to show the king in a positive light and the rest of the people, the subjects, in a very negative light. So when Gulliver says that he wants food and he wants something to drink, the emperor's orders are carried out and he's provided everything so that he will cooperate. Now once Gulliver has eaten and drunk, he feels a moral responsibility to these people, and the responsibility is that he will not try to escape from this place. So Gulliver is lying, and the king rides up to him and very narrowly escapes injury, because the horse is not used to this huge giant, and when he comes close, the horse rears back and almost throws the emperor down, but because the emperor is a very good rider, so he manages to control the horse. I think that is enough for today. We'll have some more in the next lecture. Thank you for being very patient, and Allah Hafiz.